The hatch in front of you leads to a nuclear reactor that's lost its cooling water, and the captain is asking for volunteers. It's July 4th, 1961, the North Atlantic. You're Boris Korchilov, 23, an engineer lieutenant on K-19, the Soviet Union's first nuclear missile submarine. And since 4:15 this morning, her aft reactor has been climbing toward 800 degrees. Nothing aboard is built to cool it, and the radio that reaches Moscow is dead. The protection they hand you is a chemical raincoat and a gas mask that gamma radiation treats like paper. 5 minutes behind that hatch is a shift. 10 is the rest of your life. Captain First Rank Nikolai Zateyev needs 3 men at a time, in short rotations, to weld a new cooling line onto the reactor. He looks at you and asks the question the record kept. Well, Boris, do you know where you're going? Your answer is 4 words long. I know, Comrade Captain. They dress you in the suit built for chemical warfare, a rubberized raincoat, gloves, and isolating gas mask. It can keep radioactive steam out of your lungs. Against the gamma pouring off the core, it does nothing at all. The wheel spins, the hatch swings open, steam rolls out of Compartment 6, and you step through first, 2 men behind you. The door seals. Inside, the steam is radioactive, the heat is climbing, and the pipe you've come to weld sits on the body of the reactor itself. It started at 4:15, ship's time. The log entry is plain. Pressure in the aft reactor's primary cooling circuit. 0. K-19 is in the Norwegian Sea, roughly 70 nautical miles from a NATO-garrisoned island called Jan Mayen, heading home from her first major deployment. In the exercise she's just finished, she played the American missile submarine the rest of the fleet had to hunt, and finished the job. Then, a leak no one could reach emptied the cooling circuit. Investigators would later trace it to construction damage, a flaw, in her captain's telling, the size of a drop of welder's solder. Both circulation pumps seized. The emergency rods slammed in and killed the chain reaction, and it didn't matter. The fuel kept making heat on its own. Decay heat. With no water moving through the core, the temperature started climbing toward 800 degrees Celsius, toward the compartment you are about to enter. The boat itself had warned them. At her christening, the champagne bottle swung, slid off the rubber-coated hull, and refused to break. Sailors notice things like that. About 10 people died building her, workers lost in a fire, 6 women fatally poisoned by fumes while gluing rubber lining, an electrician crushed under a missile tube cover. In December 1960, months before this patrol, the same cooling system had already failed once at sea when a circulation pump quit. And underneath it all sat one design decision. Her reactors carried no emergency cooling system. None. The casualty you are living through right now has no checklist, no spare parts, and no page in any manual. Because the men who drew this plant never gave the crew a second way to cool the core. In the reactor control spaces, your officers improvise. Captain Lieutenant Yuri Povstyev, who runs the propulsion division, proposes it. Force water straight through the core. Cut into the reactor's air vent line, weld a pipe onto it, and pump in fresh water from the boat's own reserves until the heat flushes out. The engineering chief, Anatoly Kozyrev, and Lieutenant Mikhail Gorbachev work out the mechanics, and the materials list is whatever the boat happens to carry. Copper pipe of the kind used for charging torpedoes with high-pressure air. The catch is plain. The welding has to happen inside Compartment 6, beside the dying core, in a radiation field where minutes of work cost a man everything. And no one can ask Moscow, because the long-range set is dead. The men aboard believe something worse, too, that a reactor explosion this close to NATO's island could be taken for a provocation, even the opening shot of a war. So now it's you, a torch, and the pipe. The record keeps the shape of the work. 3 men at a time, 5 to 10 minutes a shift, roughly 2 hours of cutting and welding in all, teams rotating through so nobody stays too long. The compartment is full of escaping steam, and the steam is full of fission products. The isolating mask is the only thing keeping it out of your lungs. The gamma, you already know, answers to nothing you are wearing. It comes through the raincoat, through the wet heat, through you, registering on no gauge you carry. You work. The torch hisses against the pipe joint, and the water you're trying to deliver is the only way left to stop the core behind you. 5 minutes is a shift. 10 is a sentence. The dose you are absorbing right now will be estimated later at 5,000 to 6,000 roentgens.
Zateyev wrote down what he saw.
You came out, tore off your gas mask, and vomited on the deck. By his account, the signs are soon on every man who worked the pipe. Exposed skin reddening, faces and hands swelling, small dots of blood rising on foreheads. These are not film effects. They are the captain's own recollections, and he is watching men he ordered through a hatch begin to come apart. The doctors aboard can do almost nothing, because there is no treatment in any sea bag for an estimated 50 sieverts, and 8 men from the repair teams have taken doses in that range. Zateyev will compress everything about this morning into one documented sentence. It is hard to send men to their death. By about 8:45 in the morning, the improvised line is assembled, and fresh water from the boat's reserves starts moving through the core. The cold water cracks overheated fuel elements as it hits them, and a fresh spike of radiation rolls through the boat. The cure itself wounds her. But the temperature stops climbing. Then it falls. The jury-rigged pipe, the copper, the welds made in 5-minute shifts, they hold. The core that was running toward meltdown goes quiet, and K-19 does not become a steam explosion in the Norwegian Sea. The boat you went through the hatch for is going to live. That is the breath the whole boat takes, and it lasts about as long as a breath. Because this is still a contaminated submarine with 139 men aboard in the open sea, the sick are getting worse by the hour, and the radio that could call for help is still dead. Zateyev takes stock of what is left to command. Contamination has rolled through compartments far from the reactor. The worst dosed men are failing in front of their crewmates, and panic on a sealed steel hull has nowhere to go. What he does next is in his own memoirs. He orders the small arms thrown into the sea, all but 5 pistols, which go to the officers he trusts most. There will be no mutiny on K-19, and there never is one. Then the low-power transmitter, the only radio still alive, gets an answer. Diesel submarine S-270 under Captain Zhan Sverbilov has caught the weak distress call, and by the Russian accounts, he steams toward you in violation of his standing orders. When S-270 takes the 11 worst irradiated men aboard, radiation in her own compartment jumps. Sverbilov keeps them anyway. More boats come, then destroyers. Within roughly a day of the alarm, the whole crew is off. K-19 goes home at the end of a tow rope. The worst cases fly to Moscow, to Hospital No. 6, the closed clinic of the Institute of Biophysics. The doctors try everything their era has: blood transfusions, a bone marrow transplant protocol worked out by Professor Valinsky. On paper, none of it is happening. The diagnoses are falsified to astheno-vegetative syndrome, a nervous condition, because the accident is a state secret. Within days, the men who worked the pipe can no longer speak. In Zateyev's account, they could only whisper, and some begged to be killed. Boris Korchilov, the man whose boots you have been standing in, dies on the 10th of July, 23 years old, 6 days after stepping through the hatch first. By the 25th, all 8 are gone. Ordochkin, Kashenkov, Ryzhikov, Penkov, Savkin, Karitonov, and Yuri Povstyev, the officer who invented the fix. Korchilov's family receives the Order of Lenin. Not the hero of the Soviet Union. We don't award for accidents, Khrushchev reportedly said. The funerals happen at night. Sealed metal coffins, military escorts, no announcements. Graves at Kuzminskoye Cemetery in Moscow and Krasnenkoye in Leningrad, and families who at first are not even told where. The surviving crew sign their silence away, by later Russian accounts for 30 years. On August 5, 1961, 49 of them received decorations, each a grade lower than their commanders requested, and no hero of the Soviet Union among them. The fleet gives the boat a name the state never would have chosen: Hiroshima. And then, for 3 decades, the Soviet Union simply does not acknowledge that the morning of July 4, 1961, ever happened. The story surfaces only when the country that classified it ceases to exist, and an old captain starts giving interviews. So, the hatch, the raincoat, the 5 to 10 minute shifts. What did they buy? The reactor never melted down. The boat came home, and every man taken off her was alive. 3 weeks later, the 8 who worked the pipe were not. In 2006, Mikhail Gorbachev nominated this crew for the Nobel Peace Prize, and his letter states the stakes on the record. Through their courage, A reactor explosion and an environmental catastrophe in the ocean were averted, and an explosion aboard, in those waters, could have been taken for a military provocation, even an attempt to launch a nuclear strike. Physicists are clear that K-19's reactor could never have detonated like a bomb. A meltdown and a steam explosion were the real dangers. The men at the hatch knew none of that, and walked in anyway. After K-19, no Soviet naval reactor was built without an emergency cooling system again. That rule exists because 8 men proved why it had to. One more thing the record keeps. K-19's executive officer that morning was Vasily Arkhipov. 16 months later, he's aboard submarine B-59 off Cuba. The captain orders a nuclear torpedo readied, and it cannot launch without him. Next time, that chair is yours.